Hey, this is Warren Redlick. Thanks for watching. Looks like we've already got 20 people watching. I'm here with Steve Kinney. We're going to talk about the ultimate Robocar or Robotaxi. Before we get into that, I just wanted to comment. I've seen a lot of people talking about the Tesla share price. People concerned that the share price has gone down to 1,400 or something like that. Okay, just like 2 weeks ago, I did a video excited about it going up to 1,200. I think people need to panic a little less about the momentary share price. So just to be clear, I am an investor. I own stock in Tesla. I also own stock in Amazon and some other companies. I am not worried about the daily share price. People are tweeting about it all the time. I see people talking about it all the time, so I notice. But I own my Tesla stock in an IRA. I'm 54 years old. I don't expect to be able to touch that money for 11 years. I'm a buy and hold investor, and I don't think about things in terms of momentum, or I look at how's the business doing. So when you see me on this channel talking about what I think Tesla is worth or what I think Tesla will be worth, I'm talking about future value, that what Tesla is generating as a company. I'm not really worried about. I'm not really worried. Sorry, I just realized I can't read the chat without my glasses. Thank you guys for your comments. I just don't, the day-to-day share price is like, okay, the markets are frothy, things happen. Some investors are selling because the stock goes up in value. The stock goes up in value, and they have to rebalance their portfolio. Something I should do if I was a competent investment manager. I would be selling some of my stock because my shareholdings of Tesla have gone up too much to be a sensible share of my portfolio. It should be 10%, 20% of your portfolio. I think ARK Invest is sold because their fund rules limit them to having a 10% holding in any one company. So if Tesla doubles, they have to sell half their stock. I am a buy and hold investor, and mine is, depending on how you measure my portfolio, it's as high as 70% of my portfolio. That doesn't include my home equity, that it doesn't include other accounts. But I have a really substantial portion of my investment, not because I invested that much in the beginning, because it went up that much. It started out as 20% of my portfolio or 10% of my portfolio. So I just wanted to touch on that because I've seen a lot of people talking about it, and if you guys want to talk about that later in this interview, put your comments on, but not for now. For now, we're going to turn to Steve Kinney. He's at BizOptimizer on Twitter. Steve, would you tell the audience? There's about 32 people watching right now. I'm sure it'll grow. Would you tell people about yourself and how you got interested in self-driving cars, Tesla, robotaxis, whatever? How'd you get into this?
Yeah, thanks, Warren. So my background is I was a software engineer at the beginning of my career, and then I became a process consultant for large companies. And so I've seen what goes behind the scenes, especially Fortune 100 companies. And to be honest, I believe that there's a lot of industries that need to be disrupted. And so one of my passions is studying technology, not for the sake of employing technology per se, but to figure out where that technology can be used to employ and solve problems in a better way than we have been solving them for the last, I'll say, 100 years. So I came upon Tesla about 5 years ago. I've been studying, Steve Jobs. I've been studying, Microsoft. I've been studying a lot of different technology companies. But when I started looking at Elon, I realized this was very different, what he was doing. Not just one company, and even one company is not just one industry. They were poised to disrupt in ways that were almost mind-blowing for me. So for instance, you look at Tesla, they're not just taking on, one large industry such as automotive. They're taking on, many industries, and the further we get, the more there are. So about 5 years ago, I started studying them. About 2 years ago, I did similar to you. I've backed up the truck and am disproportionately invested in Tesla as of 2 years ago. And I should be rebalancing as well. I'm a similar age to you, but I'm not. And the reason is the more I look at them, the more I look at the potential of what they can do is just mind-blowing.
Yeah. Well, I would say this. There's a theory of investing that I heard somewhere a year or so ago, which was like, yeah, you wanted to have a balanced portfolio and everything, but every once in a while you see a stock that you think is going to go 5x, 10x or more. And I look at it, and I've run the numbers, and I've got a video coming up where I talk about why I think I think it might go to 100,000 a share. That's how crazy I think of Tesla stock. And I actually have a spreadsheet that I put together to explain it. It has to do with robotaxis, and that's a video I'm going to do in a little while. So, but the topic of our video is the ultimate Robocar or the ultimate Robotaxi. So I think people who follow my channel know where I go with this. Before we get into it, Tim Wright says, I'm planning on having a Cybertruck fleet of Robotaxis. What will be my challenges? Tim, I think we're gonna talk about Cybertruck as a part of this conversation. So stay tuned. Real quick, Steve has his take on it. My take is that there's really going to be a mix of robo-taxis, but I think there's one that's going to be dominant. Oh, thanks, Ben, for your comment. So, Steve, what's your take? What's the ultimate robocar?
Okay, so what I did is I started thinking, I always love to take a position that's different than someone else's. Not that I totally disagree with it, but it just so happens I disagree with you on this. So, but with that, what I'm looking at is not just cost, but it's flexibility in the situation. So my posit in this is that the ultimate robotaxi has multiple seats, each with a separate environment that can prevent cross-contamination. There's a way to disinfect between sessions, but it's around flexibility. It's flexibility in the moment. And so sometimes you'll put your robotaxi out with the 4-seat configuration, and that's where you've got, front, back on each side. Each one is separately contained with separate heating ventilation systems. And there could be up to 4 different fares, each paying their own price on this. There could be the configuration where there's a front and back on the left side, and the right side is a fully reclined sleeper. There could be the option where there's 2 sleepers, right?
Let me just
one on both
let me
sides.
just pause you on this. And folks, we talked a little bit about this before we went live. When you describe a flexible architecture for your ultimate robocar, is it like a transformer? You're saying, okay, I mean, is it that there's one model and there's different configurations of that model to drive around, or that same model can transform in between rides?
Great question. So it is actually a great question. At this stage in the process, I'm thinking more about the what's than the how's. And the only reason is because the what is the first discussion to have at this point. So I haven't put thought into whether it is the how is to do it as a transformer style, or, like one of the ideas I have is, maybe on the weekends, there's going to be more that are the sleeper option. And on weekdays, more there's the 4 option. Maybe in the mornings, there's the 4 option, and the afternoons, there's the 3 option, and so on. And maybe it has to go to a service center in order to do an Indy pit stop. And in 3 minutes, they've zip, pulled out some seats and put in new ones. Whatever that solution is, I think it needs to be optimized around rider comfort, right? It's not optimized around whether it's a transformer or not, but if you can make an environment that autonomously transforms from one to another, and the riding environment is optimal, so be it. But if it takes going to a service center to do an Indy pit stop to change it, if that's what it takes to have the ultimate in comfort, I think that's what it will be.
So for people who didn't follow, because I think I talk fast, I think you actually talk faster than me. As I understand your idea, it's a Model Y perhaps, or a Model 3, similar in that size, that can be configured to multiple seating options or sleeping options, is the general idea. And how exactly that works out, whether it's a vehicle that configures itself on the way, or it's the same structure that different people have different versions of it, or they're changed for the weekend. The idea is one same-sized vehicle that can be configured in different ways inside the vehicle. That's the rough idea, right?
Exactly. And I mean, we talked beforehand, it could be a 3 or it could be a Y. I mean, this could be, the minute they've got the Cybertruck, it could be that when Elon even mentioned on the con call last week that it could be, there's going to be this new larger option, it almost doesn't matter the platform. What matters is that there's a dynamic nature to it. It's all about serving clients really fast, kind of like Bezos says. Nobody's ever going to complain if they get their package faster, so it needs to arrive to them faster. I think as far as the robotaxi goes, nobody will ever complain that it's too comfortable. And nobody's ever going to complain having options. So one option might be that, it's a one-time, price for getting it to you. And maybe that price is the cost to disinfect it between rides. And maybe you'll say for a 20-mile ride, you're paying $1 a mile. If you're the only one, it goes point A to point B with no interruptions. And that might give you the option, well, what if instead of getting there in 27 minutes, you'll get there in 35 minutes, but we'll take the ride down to $16. You know, the ultimate in configurability from time to get there versus, cost to you. I think flexibility is key.
Okay, something you said, Ben, right now I think we're talking about Tesla, but I think we're open to other companies providing. Matt Burns said something that fit with something you mentioned. You mentioned the larger vehicle or the higher density vehicle that Elon talked about, and Matt said, isn't the 15 passenger just for the tunnels? So for those who don't know, and this is a video another video I'm planning to make a video about what I call, and I think others have called, the Tesla minibus. Elon has talked, it's in the master plan part 2, the second master plan. My French pronunciation, forgive all my French pronunciation. Master plan part 2. There was a reference to a high capacity vehicle, and Elon mentioned it again in the quarterly second quarter investor conference call, that there might be a high density vehicle. And Matt Burns asked, isn't that just for the tunnels? I don't think so, Matt. In the master plan the second master plan where it was mentioned, I'm giving up on my French pronunciation. In the master plan, I believe it's meant for urban transit, driving around roads, taking people to their destinations. It would be less convenient than having your own Robotaxi taking you from point A to point B, but because you're spreading out the costs over more passengers, the cost per mile would go down. This is, I did a video a while back. I have a friend who's homeless, and we talked about whether Robotaxis could serve him. And even with how inexpensive we think the cost per mile be with the future Model 3 or my favorite Podcar Robotaxi, it's still more expensive for him than taking a city bus. City bus is extremely inconvenient because it takes a really long time to get there. And so the question is whether a Tesla minibus could be some kind of compromise. So I do think that would not just be in the tunnels. I think that would be comparable to a minivan, but designed to have more seating than a typical minivan. I think that's the idea. I don't know. Oh, thank you, Oleg. But Oleg, your name doesn't sound French, so I don't know. Oleg says my French pronunciation's okay, but your name looks Russian, Oleg, so I don't know. Nas Vidanya. I don't speak Russian either. So I'm going to turn this to, we have your version of the ultimate Robocar, and it's that Model, I think Model Y. By the way, I rode in a Model Y. I drove a Model Y yesterday. I put a video up yesterday. My friend and neighbor, Brian, just got a Model Y long range. Absolutely fantastic. And I think the cost of manufacturing a Model Y is almost identical to the cost of manufacturing a Model 3, and it just has more room. It's just a more practical vehicle. So I think, it's capable, at least in theory, of 7-passenger seating as well. I haven't seen that configuration yet. So to me, it's the Model Y as sort of if we're going with your version, Steve, it's the Model Y because you can do more with it.
Well, I'm also trying not to base it on today's, assumptions. So today's assumptions are the 3 was built in a way that you were seeing them slowly modify that. I don't know what it's going to be like 2 or 3 years from now. And so in my theory, you're right. If it was today, absolutely the Model Y would make sense. But do you mind if I share some of the key assumptions in this as far as costs and value? So one of the things I looked at, one of my assumptions was that the Robotaxi has the 1,000,000-mile drivetrain, which is the battery and the motor, right? The cost per kilowatt hour, we'll just say at the fleet level, is 10 cents. I think we're going to see Tesla driving that down. We know the cost of production is around 2 cents these days and going down, but the transmission is where some of the issues are. But for this argument, we'll use that. The Robotaxi, I'm assuming, is going to get 4 miles per kilowatt hour, right? We're seeing that now, some models. And then tires, that's another expense. And just for argument's sake, we'll say 4 new tires at fleet cost is, let's say, $750. And then the last assumption is that the autonomous driving will be optimized for minimal tire wear. The way you or I would probably drive that Model Y might be very different than the autonomous driving. So if just for argument's sake, we could say that you'll get 50,000 miles on a set of tires. Now what we do is when we break those costs down, a $25K cost to produce, for Tesla to produce that million mile car is 2.5 cents per
Right.
mile. The cost to power it is again at 10 cents per kilowatt hour and 4 miles per kilowatt hour. That's 2.5 cents to power it. The tire cost at $750 for 50,000 miles is 1.5 cents per mile. You add those costs up, we're at 6.5 cents per mile. Okay. So, there's probably some other incidental things that don't matter that much. But now the question is, how much is a rider mile cost? Because, if the taxi has to drive to get them and pick them up, some assumptions I'll see is, for every mile to a rider mile is paying, then there's a mile to pick them up. Well, when we look at the configuration that I'm proposing, I think that we're going to get it up to 6.5 cents per rider mile. You'll have sometimes when no one's in the car, sometime when there's one fare in the car, sometimes when there's two, sometimes there's as many as four. But for argument's sake, if we now say on average it's 6.5 cents per rider mile, and right now at $1 per mile, I think we just, Tesla would clean up in this market. Now the cost itself isn't the relevant thing. And whether it's 6.5 cents or 4.5 cents or 8.5 cents, that's not what matters. What matters is you provide such an amazing experience that people stop using their vehicles for this, and people start actually using transportation in areas they never thought of. What are your thoughts on that so far?
You use the word transportation, and where I see the market going is transportation as a service, TaaS. I think that's the future. And I actually see it as, and somebody said this in a comment, and I agree with it. I think Ben Pena said it. There's no perfect automobile, but with Robotaxi, you can order according to what you need. So what I picture is there's going to be a variety of options. And somebody mentioned earlier Cybertrucks. Sometimes you're going to need a big bed to be able to carry stuff. So basically, you're going to pull out your phone, right? And you're gonna go on your app, your Tesla app, and you're gonna say, "Hey, I need a ride." And just like when you go on Uber or Lyft and you say, "What do you want a luxury SUV? Do you want to do a ride share?" You're gonna have these choices, and the choices it'll say, and like when you go to a rental car company, you have a choice of what kind of rental car you want. So my picture of it is, and this is the number. I believe Elon said this, and I think this is roughly accurate. 80% of travel is one person going from point A to point B. It's not two people, it's not four people. And Uber and Lyft offer a rideshare option where you're sharing, what's it called? Uber, I forget the term for it, but where you're willing to share the ride with someone else in order to save a few bucks. And I think it's less than 20% of people end up getting a shared ride. I think that the practical reality is I want to go from where I am to that spot over there. And if I'm cheap. If I'm going to save a few bucks and I'm not in a hurry, I'm going to save a few bucks. But a lot of people who are riding Uber just want to get from point A to point B. They don't want to delay. They don't want to worry about it. And a lot of times there's no person available to share who closely enough matches where you're going to make it work.
Great point.
So I think a lot of the rides are going to be one person. So for me, it's you could choose a Model 3, you could choose a Model Y, you can choose a Model S or X if you want the luxury experience. You'll be able to choose the minibus if you got a group of people. And you'll be able, my future, which I made a video about this, which I think is one of my favorite videos, but not the most views, is the Podcar Robotaxi. A single passenger, small, 3-foot wide, lightweight, small battery pack vehicle that will take you where you want to go from your one place in the city to another place in the city. One place, typically it's for local travel because most travel is local. With another version, I mean, and that's the dominant one is the urban, suburban, single passenger, small, lightweight, and I'll get into the numbers on this in a minute. The other variant is if you're going on a long trip. I think on the long trips, the minibus or the car you're talking about might make more sense. I love your sleeper option, by the way. That's not something that I thought of, and I love that option. But I think a longer distance version that's probably going in the Hyperloop, and And that's the other thing. What's the volume in the Hyperloop? If the Hyperloop has high volume, well, then you're going to need higher density vehicles. If it doesn't have high volume, then maybe you have single passenger vehicles. I don't know how that's going to work. But if you're going on a long trip and you're not in a Hyperloop, I could see where there'd be a long, and the long distance version would be geared for higher speeds, would be more aerodynamic. You might be reclined in your seat to allow the roof to be lower. But I want to get into the numbers. And there's an important distinction that I feel like a lot of people don't get. There's a lot of people who see the current state of EVs and say, okay, as batteries improve, we're going to go from 250-mile batteries to 300-mile batteries to 400-mile batteries. We're already at the 400-mile battery with the 400-mile range with the Model S. And people think we're going to go to 500, 600, 800. And Elon did say that the tri-motor Cybertruck's going to have a 500-mile range. The Roadster's going to have a 600-mile range. So he has pumped that a little bit. But I believe, and he was very clear in the Q2 call, that they are battery constrained. And so the big distinction between the Podcar I'm talking about and the 4 or 5 passenger vehicle you're talking about is the Model 3, Model Y start at a 50 kilowatt hour pack. And maybe you go down to 40, because I think the iron phosphate ones they're going to do in China, they're probably going to be 40 kilowatt. I don't think they could squeeze 50 kilowatt hours of lithium. Iron phosphate has volumetric, and I'm going to do a real brief scientific thing. Sorry, scientific engineering thing. The nickel cobalt aluminum batteries that Tesla uses have 250 watt hours per kilogram, I believe is the right number, or 250 watts per kilogram. I forget. That's a gravimetric energy density. That's by weight. And lithium iron phosphate is 160. So the nickel cobalt aluminum batteries have higher energy density by weight, and it's about 40% better or whatever. It's better, but it's not. The energy density is a significant difference, but it's a much bigger difference in terms of volume. How much volumetric energy density is how much space does it take up? So Tesla is shifting to iron phosphate in the Model 3 in China. I believe they'll use iron phosphate in the Model Y in China, and they're going to get close to 300 miles of range with it. I think they're going to do it with a 50 kilowatt hour pack or a 40 kilowatt hour. Somehow they're going to do it with a 40 kilowatt hour pack. I'm not sure how they're going to squeeze that much iron phosphate in there, but they're going to find a way. So if you go down to this really lightweight single passenger Robotaxi, the Podcar Robotaxi that I imagine, what it allows you to do is go from the 50 kilowatt hour pack to a 20 kilowatt hour pack or a 10 kilowatt hour pack, especially urban where you're going to be able to recharge it. You're going to be taking short trips and there'll be opportunities to recharge. And the reason why that matters is the goal is to have as many of these things on the road as possible. And if you're battery constrained, if every vehicle you make has to have a 50 kilowatt hour pack, then you can't make as many vehicles as if you make a really lightweight vehicle that only has a 10 kilowatt hour pack. So my pitch is that the single car passenger Robotaxi, number one, it costs less. There's less construction cost to make the tiny vehicle. You're making it in greater volume, so the cost per vehicle is lower. That brings the cost per mile down. And the size of the battery pack is smaller, so you're spending less on battery, which is a big component of cost. It's got a narrower front. You probably make it more, it probably has a much more efficient operation because it's pushing less wind out of the way, it's carrying less weight. And I think you said 6.5 cents per mile cost for yours. I think you're getting this down to 3 cents a mile. It's only carrying one person, which is a disadvantage.
Yes. There's a ton to unpack with what you just said.
Yeah, that's way too much.
So I'm gonna figure out how to do this. I'm gonna have to kind of peel this back one piece at a time. I think one thing that the 80% where you said Elon said that 80% is a one rider model. That's based on today, right? I don't know about you, but how many Uber rides have you taken in the last 2 months?
0.
Okay, I've taken 1, right? And before COVID happened, we were probably taking a few more than that. but the dynamics change incredibly when people stop buying autos and start doing TASS. So as far as the quantity of people doing it allows for a lot of creative Uber pool type options, right?
Uber
So
pool,
I
thank
think
you.
the numbers, the percentages based on 80% is one rider is based on today. I also think that the Uber pool data is based on today. I think that's going to dramatically change. And so there's a whole bunch we can unpack there. I'm kind of almost imagining forward to this day where, I mean, it is a high percentage of people that are going, I am using this model because I don't want to have to find a place to park my car. I don't want to drive the car. I want to relax on the way. I want to do work on the way and so on. And so a lot of these numbers are moot at that point. They're going to need to get readjusted. But there's one thing that I'll kind of dig into first, and that's around safety. Okay, so I also teach a couple of classes for UCI Extension in the marketing program. I'm on the advisory committee for their internet marketing program. And when we're looking at what a market wants, what people want, I mean, there's certain things that are just, they're willing to sacrifice for in one way or another. And safety is one of them. There's not enough money in the world to buy, health back. There's enough money in the world to buy a loved one back. I think safety comes into play. Another thing in what you said was, getting down, optimizing. You were talking, and this is kind of where one of my backgrounds is in optimizing, and that's what I helped large companies do is optimize. You're optimizing for kilowatt hours of batteries that Tesla can produce and number of vehicles. But let me have a counterpoint to that, which is if you say, okay, we've got a Robotaxi that's at 40 kilowatt hours, and maybe the Model Y is, let's just arguably say at 80 kilowatt hours, in order for it to, if what Musk is optimizing for is getting ICE cars off the road, even a doubling in kilowatt hours to get to that model that seats 4, as long as you have the riders per mile at least double for that single Robotaxi, it better fits his what he's trying to optimize for than the Robotaxi model. There's a bunch more to unpack, but I'd love to just get your take on that and see what your thoughts are.
The one thing you said that really blew me away was I'm thinking today's world, there's not enough people who want to share a ride. The Uber pool that you talked about, the Uber pool numbers are low because there aren't that many people riding Uber.
Yes.
And if you change to a world where no one owns their own car and everyone is riding robo-taxis, there may be a lot more opportunity for Uber pool-like rides. And I did not think of that. So I give you a lot of credit for seeing that because that's something I did not see. I think it just, I guess I missed something there. I was talking about this difference. If you can get down to a 10 kilowatt hour pack, you can produce 5 times as many vehicles. What was your take on that?
Oh, I missed that. Okay, I thought we were down. I thought you were talking 40 kilowatt hour packs.
Let me be clear about what I was saying then. I think the Model Y and Model 3 at the bottom end are a ballpark of 50 kilowatt hour pack.
Roger that. Okay.
And
all right, so
I think I think a Podcar could potentially get down to a 10 kilowatt hour pack, so you could make 5 times as many of them. The safety issue is something we could talk about, but just first that point about if you go to a smaller vehicle with a smaller pack, you can make more of them. What do you think about that?
Okay, no, I think that does make sense, and so, but then the question is what is the trip scenario where that's going to make sense? I do have to agree with you now that I start to think of it like that. If the scenario is me getting in the car to go to the local grocery store, I could say, okay, safety isn't as big of an issue. I'm going to hit a top speed of 45 miles an hour, and so on. So I could see there is a configuration where that works. Now, what it is those. So now I'm almost seeing an amalgam of what we were saying. There's those that are in place for those short trips where it makes sense, and pooling up doesn't make sense. But if we're thinking of going to work, what is the average number of miles? I think I Googled that and it was somewhere on the order of 20 miles. I don't know if that makes sense for the 20-mile ride where you're on the freeway a fair bit. Safety is going to be more of an option. I don't know if that option has the configuration choices I have. Like one morning, I literally might want the sleeper on the way there. And the next morning, I want the entertainment center on the way there. And then the morning after that, I need to be holding a really important meeting on the way. I don't know if you'll have the flexibility and dynamicity, I don't know if that's a word, of doing that. But I'm starting to think there's an amalgam of these two that might make sense.
Okay. So I want to address the safety question because you brought it up a couple times. I don't see the Podcar. Well, first of all, somebody mentioned Arcimoto in the chat, and Arcimoto is. I don't think Arcimoto is where it's going. I think are you familiar with Arcimoto?
I am familiar with them. I haven't studied them directly.
So for those who aren't familiar, I use clips of Arcimoto in my Podcar Robotaxi video. Arcimoto is a 3-wheeled single passenger vehicle. I believe they're around $20,000 right now. The Hyperchange YouTube channel, which is one of my favorite channels, he's talked about Arcimoto a bit. My problem with Arcimoto is, number one, I don't think 3-wheelers make sense. I don't think you save that much on 4 wheels compared to 4 wheels. Obviously, if it's $20,000 an Arcimoto, that's not saving you that much money over the $25,000 cost of making a Model 3 down the road. So I just don't. I think Arcimoto could potentially be there, but I suspect Tesla will be able to make something better. But the safety issue is, as long as we have human drivers on the road, I don't want to be in a pod car. I don't feel safe. I'm not worried about the machines. The robotaxis are fine. By the time we get robotaxis running, they're going to be safer than humans. And It's the march of the nines. A year later, they're going to be 10 times safer. A year after that, they're going to be 10 times safer. Accidents are going to be so rare that the structural safety of the vehicle is not going to be an issue anymore 5 years from now. And I think Robotaxi goes live 2021. But I agree with you. In the short term, in the next few years, we will not see small Podcar robotaxis that weigh 800 pounds and get crushed if they hit a large vehicle. It's going to be when the human drivers are gone that we get there.
Are you saying that it's only going to be 5 years until we get human drivers off the road? Because I'm thinking in my mind, optimally 10 and possibly 20. But you're saying 5. That's fast.
Okay, so you're right. I think I'm being a little aggressive. I think the change will happen faster than people realize, but I'm probably optimistic when I say 5 years. Everything I say is optimistic. I do believe we're going to see a robotaxi operating somewhere by the end of 2021. I think that, I've had limited experience driving full self-driving, but my experience was like, wow, this is amazing. And that was really a while ago, and it keeps getting better and better and better. And with the foundational rewrite, with 4D labeling, with everything that's coming, I think it's going to be, even so. If we start seeing robotaxis, here's the path that I see. You get the Model 3s and Model Ys out there charging $1 a mile, and I'm not going to let my kid drive a car anymore because my kid's cost of driving is more than $1 a mile. I have a 15-year-old who's learning to drive and an 18-year-old who's driving. The cost of insurance, the minimal amount of driving they do, get off my insurance and just take robotaxis, and you're going to save me money, and you're going to be safer because you're not that good of a driver. And that's no offense to my kids. My kids are good kids, but you just don't see the road the same as we do.
It's an economic forcing function. Like Elon says, that's an economic forcing function. There's a point at which you're not going to dole out the money it takes to insure and all that stuff. No. And from a safety perspective, I mean, if money wasn't an issue, you'd still do that for your kids, right?
Right. And then, so what happens is the most expensive drivers, the drivers for whom driving is the most expensive, switch to robotaxi first. The guy with 2 drunk driving convictions on his record, he's paying so much for car insurance. The person who only drives 5,000 miles a year and the amortization of the vehicle over the miles adds up to a lot. At some level, a lot of people start thinking, well, wait a minute, I'm spending $10,000 a year on a car. I would spend $5,000 a year on a robotaxi. You're going to start to see that. And then there's a moment, which I think is 2 or 3 years away, where there's going to be a cascade effect. The sale of ICE cars will fall off a cliff. Mm-hmm. As Tesla ramps up production, and this is something, I don't know how many people have caught me saying this before. Elon basically said this in the conference call and at Autonomy Day. Each robotaxi takes 5 cars off the road.
Yes.
It's driving 5. He said it like, well, the average car drives 12 hours a week and the robotaxi will drive 60 hours a week. I think the robotaxi is going to drive closer to 100 hours a week, by the way, but that's another I think it takes 6 cars off the road, 8 cars off the road. I don't think it's just 5. But if each robotaxi takes 5 cars off the road, and Tesla makes, let's say it's 2023 and Tesla makes 3 million vehicles, That's 15 million ICE cars that are not sold. I'm going to say that again.
Yes.
That's 15 million ICE cars that are not sold. And Ford and General Motors and Volkswagen, all these companies, I'm sure there's exceptions, but a lot of these companies, their whole empire is predicated on debt. And that debt is predicated on them selling the same number of cars that they made last year or more. And when their sales start to drop, they will collapse. And some governments will try to prop them up. There will be some, but you're going to see major car makers fail, and the business model just stops working. And
you know what just came to mind with what you
Sure.
just said? So what came to mind is I love economic forcing functions because that just makes sense. A lot of people do things based on money, especially at the fleet level. What you just talked about is there's this tipping point with the traditional automakers, and there's this tipping point at which they can't produce. And I think where everybody's not able to see it is like, well, then who can? They're looking at how Tesla is putting things out and running that on a graph. And Elon talks about the machine that builds the machine. Well, what I just thought of when you said that is, what about they're building the machine that builds the machine that builds the machine?
They are.
When
Yes.
you think about that, and they're going, okay, look at what they did with Fremont, then look at what they did in China, now look at what they're doing in Berlin, and then what they're going to do in Austin. There's going to be a point at which instead of building one machine that builds the machine at a time, they can build two, and there's going to be a point at which they could build 5 or 10. And it's not like it has to go 1 to 2 to 4 or whatever. There is a point at which they know how to build the machine that they're really good at building the machine that builds the machine that builds the machine.
Well, I would agree with that, except for the battery constraint. I think the battery constraint is so severe. Like, he was begging people to mine nickel, and
Yes.
if you can go to iron, I don't think there's a shortage of any of the materials in the iron phosphate battery. So I think, to people who missed that, Elon said in the quarterly conference call, in the Q2 conference call, he referred to using iron phosphate. And I said this, I have a video. If you go to my channel, my #1 video is about Tesla batteries. And I made a video also about the Cybertruck batteries, where I talked about iron phosphate in both of those videos. And if Tesla has a shortage of nickel, but they can use a different battery chemistry that doesn't involve nickel, that frees up the nickel chemistries for what's important. For Semi, for Roadster, for Plaid Model S, for the Trimotor Cybertruck, those will get the nickel-based chemistries. CATL has developed a cell-to-pack technology that Elon had talked about. So they're going to find a way to squeeze more iron phosphate battery into Tesla vehicles. And I think that's going to compromise range to an extent. So you're not going to see 400-mile Model 3s. You're going to see 300-mile Model 3s or 280-mile Model 3s and Model Ys. But regardless, scaling up battery production is a huge problem. And I don't know whether Tesla's planning on making iron phosphate or just buying them from CATL and others. Go ahead.
But let me ask you this. So I get it right now, the constraint might be nickel. I think it was not, I think that was well planned that they brought this up here. But what have they done with every constraint? They've gotten in, anytime there was an external provider, they'll work with them to the point of diminishing returns, and then they'll just go do it. So, I mean, they've already been alluding to the fact that they'll get into mining if they have to get into mining. I can only imagine how inefficient mining is. If you look at tunnels, what's happened there, you look at each one of these. So I think this idea of battery constraints is very, and the elements that go into that is temporary. And the industries of mining, I just am seeing a day at which Tesla is in there, and whatever we could do and produce at one point, I mean, it could be an order of magnitude would just probably be enough, but it could be an order of magnitude they get in and they start solving this issue. So I think that constraint is temporary. And I think to begin to think like you're thinking in the 3 to 5 year time range, which with some pretty bold assumptions, which I, by the way, do not doubt. I'm not sure I completely agree with everything you said, but I don't doubt based on what I've seen. But I think that constraint of batteries is temporary and the elements that go with it.
I did want to say one other thing about safety. I don't think the Podcar has to wait until there are no human drivers. I think there's a safety calculation, and as the Robocar, as the full self-driving hardware and software gets better, it may become so good that it can avoid the bad human drivers when the bad human drivers make mistakes. And I'm talking about, maybe it's the FSD4 chip, and the vehicle is lightweight, so it's nimble and it's able to dodge something if it sees it. Or maybe I could see cities saying, we don't allow human drivers in certain areas.
Yes.
We have, pedestrian-only streets in some places. I could see cities saying, you know what, we don't want gas cars in our cities anymore. I could totally see Beijing and Shanghai saying no more gas cars, right? And I could totally see them saying, you know what, we lose 100 pedestrians a year, 1,000 pedestrians a year to human drivers. These robo-taxis are perfectly safe, and they're going to kill one person a year. We're going to switch, and we're not going to allow human drivers in our cities anymore. So I do think, is that 5? I mean, I think we're already seeing some of those restrictions in place. Is it 5 years away? It's probably longer than 5 years away. I'm not sure it's longer than 10. Is the Wonkavator? Just a quick comment that I enjoyed, the Wonkavator. Regarding the issue of battery supply, I don't know how much we should talk. I really want to get back to just talking about the ideal robotaxi, but I think battery supply is going to increase rapidly. I think we're going to see a 50% increase a year, but that's still a substantial constraint. And I
think 50%, you're still mapping it out on today's way of thinking. And sometimes there's these step functions where you see small changes, 50%, 50%, and all of a sudden there's this disruptive change, and now it's 10 times. Now, I'm not saying that it will or won't, but I'm just saying we need to think about, when are we thinking in terms of what we know today, and what assumptions are we making? And I challenge the assumption that it will always only be 50%, because 50% is awesome and it's dramatic. But I posit that there could be a huge, I don't know what Battery Day is going to unveil in 2 months, but from an engineering, I'm a software engineer by trade. From a software engineering perspective, sometimes things are trade-offs, and they're direct trade-offs, and sometimes you find something and everything just kind of rises all at the same time, and that's where you get these disruptive 10 times change. And so I think there's a possibility that batteries might not just stay on that 50% year over year, and they could go to a tenfold.
Okay, so just to summarize for people who are come in late, the conversation we're having, although we're wandering all over the place, the conversation we're having is about the ultimate Robocar. This is Steve Kinney. Steve talked about his picture is roughly something like the Model 3 or Model Y that's configurable, that can be varied in configuration, and that would be his picture of the ultimate Robotaxi. I see a world where there are multiple types of Robotaxis, and you take your phone out, your Tesla app, and you order what you need. Might be a Cybertruck for one thing, might be a Model Y or a Model S for a luxury experience. But my picture is the number one vehicle will be a single passenger Podcar Robotaxi that's about 3 feet wide. By the way, you could fit, if they're 3 feet wide, you could fit 2 of them next to each other in the Boring Company tunnels. Hopefully going in the same direction, although I don't know if that's necessary. But very lightweight. And the big advantage that I'm picturing is, and this is why we're talking about batteries so much, is a Model 3, Model Y typically has a 50 kilowatt hour pack. I think with a Podcar single passenger vehicle being very lightweight and designed specifically for one passenger, you could get down to a 10 kilowatt hour pack, and that means you get 5 times as many vehicles, which accelerates this is the goal, right? The mission is accelerating the transition to sustainable transportation, sustainable energy. And I'm sorry, I wanted to hit one other point. This is going to be a future video. When do you watch Hyperchange or these other guys talking about when they talk about, so you'll see somebody talking about margins, and they're talking about profit per vehicle as an example of how people talk about this. And I actually think at its core now, Tesla is a battery company. And what we should be looking at is profit per kilowatt hour.
Yes, I agree.
You are going to make 100 gigawatt hours of batteries in a year, and that's the constraint, because Elon has plainly said that's, I think you're right. Battery Day may be even more amazing than we think it's going to be. And maybe they're going to increase the rate of production like a step change. And it's going to be, okay, we're producing 5 times as many batteries tomorrow. Okay. That would be, oh my God. But he specifically says that batteries are the constraint. So to me, if batteries are the constraint, you want to maximize profit per kilowatt hour. And I think it's hard. I haven't, like, I've thought about it. It's an idea in my head. I haven't thought it through enough to make the video where I explain how that works. I've got it in my head. I've got like 2 or 3. I got one video I'm almost done with. I got another video in the pipeline where I talk about why I think it's $100,000 a share. This is coming. And the minibus. I got the minibus video I'm working on. I got like 4 or 5 videos in the pipeline. But I just think there's something about dollars per kilowatt hour that's the profit question. Real quick, Matt Burns says, when is Tesla a $1 trillion company? I don't like to predict that, Matt. I think if you assume a price earnings ratio of 40, then it's when Tesla makes 25 billion in profit. Does that sound right? That would make it a $1 trillion company. If it had a 40 price earnings ratio with $25 billion in profit, I don't think that's that far away. And Winston says battery 500 consortium hits 350 watt hours per kilogram, 350 cycles, moves towards 500. So that's something, Winston, we're going to be talking about that when Battery Day comes. I'm sure there's going to be a flurry of activity on YouTube and elsewhere about that. And then the other thing I started just in the conversation, somebody mentioned this. I think it's already gone up above my screen on the chat. And I've heard people talk about this before. Is there a way to use the boring company tunnel boring machines to mine? And I don't know the answer to that. I would bet Elon has thought about that, and I'm going to gut guess the answer is no. That tunnel boring machines are not the solution to mining. I'm going to bet there's a reason. I'm going to bet there's a reason why they're not doing that. And I don't know if you mentioned that maybe Tesla would get into mining and just do it more efficiently. There's probably a lot of inefficiencies. I don't know if Elon wants to go to that's like a big dive.
Well, I actually would love to, if you want to do another episode on that, I would agree with, I can't remember who said that, but I think there are elements of that, right? If you break down the elements of mining, it's about power, it's about, how many feet per hour you can mine, and it's about cooling, and all the elements of optimization that are there for mining a tunnel are there for mining whatever it is. So I would argue that it is, as long as some of these, raw elements are at the heart or at the limiting factor of what they're trying to do. I would not be surprised if it uses technology from that to mine. But I love your idea of the profit per kilowatt hour. That's got me thinking. There's one more that I would like to throw out there that might be a separate video or not, just something I'm going to start thinking about as well, which is ICE miles per kilowatt hour that you take off the road, right? So if we argue that, if Tesla has said their whole goal is to change this, right, and profit does not come first, profit does come probably a close second, because with profit you can move your primary metric, which is getting a dirty ICE cars off the road. You might think about ICE miles per kilowatt hour that you get off the road. There's something in that if you optimize for it. So in other words, you talk about profit. Well, what if? And I'm thinking differently than when we came on this call. I absolutely see the scenarios where the single, one-seater Robotaxi works, but I see all these other scenarios where it's about getting ICE hours off the road. So you and I have a scenario. I have a daughter that's 14 as well, and she'll be turning 15 here in a little bit. So driving in a year, and we're going to think in one way about when we'd use a Robotaxi, and we're in one, we'll say, class income level, but there's the rest of the population in this country and in this world thinks very differently than you and I don't know what that is. I haven't put too much thought. I think like I do, but if we optimize trying to get as many ICE hours or ICE miles off the road as possible, there is a different way to look at optimizing.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad you brought up, because I'm not poor. I suspect you're not poor. I've got a Cybertruck on order, and it's $57,000. There's a lot of people in India who can't drop $57,000 on a Cybertruck.
I have 2 on order.
And my wife thinks I can't afford a $57,000 Cybertruck, but I'm buying it. So I think that in the United States, the Podcar Robotaxi is the ultimate vehicle. With that said, I think there are places like India, Latin America, maybe Africa, there are countries where people are poor enough, a large number of people are poor enough that the Tesla minibus could end up being the ultimate Robotaxi in parts of the world where So my picture is you get a Podcar Robotaxi. Just to be clear, my ultimate Robotaxi is for the purpose of this this video. Maybe you get the cost per passenger down to less than 10 cents a mile. The passenger cost is less than 10 cents a mile. Maybe you're getting close to a nickel a mile. For my homeless client in Florida, that's still a lot compared to what he pays for a bus. And even though it's much more convenient, he may still choose to take an inefficient bus. But if you take a Tesla minibus and you're able to get its cost per mile down to, let's say, 10 cents a mile, where the single passenger one is down to 3 cents a mile, you get this thing. I'm talking about the cost for Tesla, say, owning it and operating it.
Sure.
If the minibus gets down to 10 cents a mile cost, but it seats 12, and on average it has 10 people in it, then the passenger cost per mile goes to a penny a mile. You know, and maybe it's not that efficient or effective, whatever. You get down to 2 cents a mile. If you're able to get their cost down to a penny or two a mile, you're really starting to serve a large part of the world. So Tesla started off making high-end vehicles for wealthy people. And now it makes somewhat high-end vehicles for upper middle-class people in the United States and Europe and Japan, and wealthy people in China and whatever, you know. But the question, if you want to do what you said, if you want to reduce the pollution, you got to hit India. India is a huge country with 1.4 billion people. You've got to cover China, not just the wealthy people in China. You've got to reach the poorer people in China. You've got to hit Africa. You've got to hit Latin America, and Southeast Asia. There's a lot of places where there are people who can't afford, for whom the 10 cents or 25 cents a mile that our dream robotaxis might cost them is too much, but the minibus saves them more. So I think locally here in the United States, in Western Europe, in Japan, Hong Kong, whatever, I think that Podcar Robotaxi is the bomb. But
you know, something that comes to mind now that you say that, what if you put the Hyperloop and the one-seater Robotaxi together? So now the idea is, okay, so let's say, you know, I'm here in Orange County, I'm in Irvine, and let's say I'm working up in LA. Well, maybe it's the one-seater Robotaxi that goes to the Hyperloop station. And then once I Hyperloop up to LA, get there very quickly, then it's the one-seater Robotaxi to get to the location that I'm working at. What if you put those together?
My picture is that the vehicles in the Hyperloop are different vehicles.
Exactly. So in other words, there's a transfer that happens.
You've got to hop out of your local Podcar, Robotaxi, whatever Robotaxi you're in.
Or your pod is delivered. I mean, it could be that there's a pod in your Robopod that the pod actually gets transferred.
The pod drives
just out of the box in here, right?
The pod drives onto the Hyperloop's vehicle.
Right.
It's like a flatbed or something.
It's like one of those little nesting dolls, you know?
I don't think that makes sense for Hyperloop. I think what makes sense for Hyperloop is you have dedicated vehicles that carry a certain number, because my expectation is that there's going to be one tunnel each way from Los Angeles to San Francisco. And
I agree with you. I'm actually saying, think of it the way the container ships work, right? When we started developing these standard containers, it changed, international shipping dramatically. The cost came down. So imagine there's the Robotaxi that carries the pod that is you. Those pods actually go onto a larger, whatever that container is, that's traversing. What it does is it optimizes for that person. So if I'm working in my pod, if I'm sleeping in my pod, if I'm being entertained in my pod, all that I know is I'm getting in my pod at my home and I'm coming out of my pod at work. But how that pod gets from here in Orange County up to LA matters not to me, as long as my environment is an environment that suits my needs.
Okay, so CFB just asked something that I want to address. I don't think that works because of the weight. I don't think the Hyperloop is going to be efficient if it has to take a 1,000-pound pod car from point A to point. I'm not saying it can't do it, but I don't think that would be efficient. And it's not my pod car, right? I just pressed an app and Tesla's pod car showed up and took me there. It takes me to the Hyperloop. I take the Hyperloop to San Francisco and I get out and another Tesla pod car picks me up. But I want to get to CFB's question, because I think this is a great question. It goes somewhere I've been wanting to go. His question is, if cost of operating a minibus can be so low, Can cities offer free ride, subsidized? We pay enough taxes in North America anyway. And there's somewhere I wanted to, I forget who else I was talking to. It might have been Omar Kazi. Is there a scenario where the transportation is free? And the scenario that I picture is it's advertising supported.
Absolutely.
You get in the minibus, right? It's only a penny a mile. How much would Coca-Cola pay to advertise to you, to throw a 30-second, and you have Coca-Cola and McDonald's and Starbucks and whoever, or you're paying. There's a vending machine. This is one of my I think genius ideas that could be incredibly stupid. Is that the Podcar or whatever Robotaxi you're in, whether it's your configurable Robocar or it's the minibus or whatever, there's a vending machine in it, and you pay $1. It costs them a quarter or 10 cents for a can of Coke, and you pay $1 in your app, and a cold Coca-Cola pops up or a hot coffee pops up.
Absolutely.
It could be that you're paying for video games, especially if you're if you're on a short trip. I don't think it matters as much for the interactivity for you while you're riding, although it may matter. And especially somebody else asked about Starlink. I don't think that Starlink would support a Starlink antenna on every vehicle. I think that's too many antennas. I don't think the network would be able to handle that. But a Starlink antenna on every minibus with Wi-Fi to the passengers, because the Starlink is going to have really high bandwidth, so you don't need that much bandwidth for one person in a car. We'll see where we are down the road. Maybe that changes. But, I could upload the stream 10 times with a Starlink connection. So, we don't need that much bandwidth. But if you have 10 people in a Tesla minibus, all of a sudden it starts to make sense. So I do think it's likely that the Tesla minibus might have a Starlink antenna on it, which won't work in tunnels. The antenna's not going to work in the tunnels, but there'll be Wi-Fi in the tunnels or something along those lines. So
exactly. So I love your advertising model, right? So I think like Google. I run a company. I've been running a search engine optimization company for 23 years. So I think like Google. And so now what does Google care about? It cares about context, right? So the context of your ride, if you're going to a grocery store or if you're going to Walmart or if you're going to Target or going to who knows where, if you can add advertising that is just in time. The optimal advertising is at the moment right before you make a purchase decision. Now your context, if I'm taking a trip to Yosemite and it's like, okay, the advertising can be for hiking boots that will arrive at my destination, or even the pod picks up on the way. I mean, those advertising dollars are solid advertising dollars. So I could easily say, I like your idea of the advertising doing the cost. The other way of the cost is, we're talking about, what is it, universal basic income, right? I mean, this may be an element of UBI, right? Everybody gets free, rides. I mean, there's a lot of different ways this cost could go to zero.
That's going to be a future video where I argue with somebody from the Yang Gang who argues for UBI. I do not believe in UBI, but I don't think that's an appropriate. I think that would be going too far afield for the purpose of this conversation. But just for the audience out there, if somebody wants to argue with me that you support universal basic income and I oppose universal basic income, let's do that in a future interview. Email me, wredlick@gmail.com. Let's have that conversation, because I think that's a great conversation. I would love to do it with Elon, but I don't think I'm up at that level yet where Elon's willing to come on my show. If anybody knows Elon and he wants to discuss universal or Andrew Yang and they want to come on and discuss universal basic income, short answer is it has to do with the law of comparative advantage. It's an economics thing. But anyway, all right, let me just read the comments here for a second. Ideally, your vehicle would sit in the garage of the person you drop off until the next ride, Thaddeus Walker says. I think there's an interesting question. You and I talked about this before. How many miles does the vehicle drive per mile it gets paid for? So Elon talks about it as 50%, that 50% of the miles are paid. I think it's got to be at least, that's the floor. It's got to be, yes. You've got to be getting paid for more than half your miles. So I think it's more like 60 or 70% of miles are paid. And that matters a lot when you get into the calculations of how much is the cost per mile.
Well, imagine with artificial intelligence going where it is. I mean, these things are going to know when to show up and how, right? So if let's just say I've got the app on my phone for Tesla, right? It's going to probably know I need a ride before I do. And it's probably going to come up and suggest the ride. Yeah. It's already going to be positioning that car, that ride, long before it even knows. I mean, the artificial intelligence implications of optimizing riders per mile, I think, is huge, especially when it becomes
Yeah,
ubiquitous.
I just had a thought and I lost it. We've been doing this too long. Um, I think that uh, I forgot. I was somewhere. What was somebody saying? I don't know if somebody triggered this in me. All right, I lost it. I think that your idea that the Robotaxi. So I don't know if it's necessarily that the network is going on when it thinks I'm going to want to ride. I think it's positioning vehicles based on trends of where people want rides. So,
But that's the old way of looking at it, right? Because when you don't have the discrete data, you can't do that. But when I trust my Tesla app to be watching the communications that I'm making, knowing that if it didn't know that, maybe it could get a ride to me on average in 11.5 minutes, and with it watching and suggesting I can get a ride there, my ride can be waiting in 2 minutes. I'm absolutely going to allow it in a scrubbed way so it does not build something against me, but to provide optimal time. Just like Bezos said, nobody ever will complain that their package arrived too soon. I don't think you'll ever complain that your ride arrived too
yeah,
soon,
but by the
right?
way, I am an investor in I bought Amazon in 2013.
All right.
It's up like 11 or 12x what I paid for it. And I have
Nice.
been amazed at how fast stuff arrives. Like, I think we've gotten packages same day, unintended, like not expected. Um,
But how do you think they do that?
I think,
I mean, ultimately, I think it's more than just the data that kind of says, well, in general, this is what people are doing. I think they know more about you and are predictive of what you're going to order next than you even know.
yeah. Um, yeah. Damn it, I had it again and I lost it again.
I'll stop
Oh,
talking.
no, my brain is damaged. You would charge based on every expense. I'm reading the comments here. No, Seth, I wasn't thinking about the mini car. Um, oh, I had a brilliant idea and it's gone. Maybe it wasn't that good. Must not have been very important then. Commercial vehicles. Um, all right. I think, shoot, I had some really big thing I wanted to talk about. Had to do with the Robotaxi network, and it's just not coming. I'm sorry. So I'm going to say that my brain is starting to be fried, and I'm apparently not able to continue the conversation. I'll probably watch this later, saying, "Oh, you should have." Um, so I think I'm going to wrap it up here. We've gone for a little over an hour. We probably have lives to get back to. I want to thank everyone for watching. I want to mention my channel sponsor is JND Support, my friend Joe Ramos. So if anybody wants to be a channel sponsor, wredlick@gmail.com. Email. We can talk about how you can sponsor the channel. Got a lot of viewers. A lot of people are interested. Steve, thank you very much. I hope we can do this again sometime.
This has been fun. Anytime you want, I'd love to have a
And
talk
for
with
anybody
you.
watching at the end of this video, you're probably going to, not live, but future watchers, at the end of the video, there's going to be some rectangles popping up with some videos of other videos you might want to watch related to this. Thanks very much for watching. Stay on, Steve. I'm going to end the stream. But thanks,
Okay.
everyone. Okay. So you and I are on. Boom.